Thanks, James. Well,
Thanks, Jennifer.
You talked about bringing the best of BHP to the outside world and the best of the outside world to BHP. What does that actually mean in practical terms?
Well, I think it means the IMARC conference really in practice, where there's been a lot of discussion about being open for business, and this is the place where collaboration really happens. I mean, you walk out in the exhibition hall, Jennifer, and you can see every name in the mining industry. It's the supermarket, the global supermarket of the mining industry. And our message last year was, given all the big opportunities that we see coming at this industry, the big mega trends of demand, electrification, decarbonisation, urbanisation, all these really positive forces for demand, the mining industry won't be able to meet those opportunities unless we collaborate. And so that was the message last year, and we've been working hard at it over the last 12 months.
Okay, so you've been working hard at it. What examples of progress can you give us?
Well, look, I think there's been a lot of good discussion already about trucks and electrification, and we've got some great examples there of some really, really important collaboration with the big OEMs, Caterpillar, Komatsu, and we're excited also to be in the next 12 months trialling electric haul trucks on our own sites, and we've got a really exciting trajectory there as well. But the implications of electrifying a mine is so much bigger than just the truck itself. It's the whole ecosystem around the truck. And a good example is the partnership we have with Bridgestone and Michelin on the tyres side, because as we've just heard, battery life, preserving the battery life is going to become a key competitive advantage for the mining industry. And tyres are a major force in preserving that battery life. So we've been partnering with Bridgestone, Michelin, talking to them about the path of electrification that we're on and collaborating with them to reduce the rolling resistance of the tyre. If we reduce the rolling resistance of a tyre by 1 to 2%, we can significantly increase the battery life. And equally, these electric trucks are going to travel a lot faster than the traditional diesel engines. So we also have to increase the tyre's durability. And so that transparency, being very open with players like Michelin, Bridgestone about what the challenges are for us, what the opportunities are for us, and how can we sit down with our engineering teams, our technical teams, and really work on solutions together.
And so, for example, if you're having a conversation with Caterpillar or Komatsu, how do you start that? What do you explain exactly what you want, or do you kind of just toss around ideas? Do you say what your targets are and they must be met? How does that work?
Look, that's a great question, Jennifer, and it really goes to the heart of the transition that we're making around being far more transparent with our partnerships. I think historically, critics of BHP would have said we would have gone to the table with very prescriptive scopes. This is what we want, this is where we're going, this is what we want you to do. And it was hard to do business with BHP, I think, with such a prescriptive view around what we needed. And I think one great thing that's happening at the company is we really are opening ourselves up. We don't have the answers, and we want our partners to challenge us with solutions with blank canvas scopes. If we're very clear around the purpose, where we're going, what we need to do for the industry, we're open for ideas.
So that kind of moving away from that prescriptive approach, right? How do you do that as a company, particularly a company like BHP, which has been so successful with the alternative?
Look, I think partnership, transparency, they're nice sentiments, they're easy words to say, but what you're getting at is how we made that really systematic. We've got an operating system at BHP. It's the BHP operating system, BOSS, which is very much a disciplined operating system. And what we've done is bring that from the inside out. We've brought it to our supplier relationships. And we've been really clear around setting a common purpose together and building routines around that purpose, built around transparency to hold each other to account to make sure that we're pulling in the right direction.
So how does this kind of go with advancing decarbonisation in that sense? How do you, because you've got lots of small suppliers, big suppliers, you know, do you put that in the general goal to all of them?
Absolutely. We've been very clear around our decarbonisation ambition. We have our own net zero targets for scope 1 and 2. And that's really part of doing business with BHP. It's the first discussion we'll have really with our incoming partners around what are our big agenda items around decarbonisation, around inclusion and diversity, around supporting traditional owner businesses. These are the discussions we're having up front with our partners, as opposed to historically they might have been jammed in at the back end of a commercial agreement. And that's been a big change across our industry.
And with the idea of cooperating not only with your suppliers but also with your peers like Rio and Vale, how does that work?
Yeah, we're also seeing a big change there actually. We've joined an alliance with Rio and Vale, as you mentioned, with Komatsu for a greenhouse gas alliance around electrifying our haul fleets. We're doing a lot of work actually at the encouragement of our partners who sit at the table with us, and in the spirit of radical transparency, they say it'd be a lot easier for us to solve your problems if you and Rio could get aligned around what you want, for example. So that's been a really positive force, and you know, I think we are just scratching the surface on that industry collaboration. I think there'll be a lot more to come.
Right. And in the interest of the radical transparency you've talked about, what are the interactions or programs that haven't worked as well as you'd hoped?
Look, I think, you know, historically I would say one area of our business where we have been challenged around being too transactional is perhaps the partnerships we have with Indigenous businesses. I think there was a view that we were short-term focused, we were transactional in nature, and that's one thing that we've really made a concerted effort to turn around. And I'm really pleased in the last 3 years we're now spending from less than $100 million a year with Indigenous vendors. We're now spending over $400 million a year here in Australia. That's Aussie dollars. With traditional owner businesses. And the way we've done that is the dollars are important, but the partnership's more important. And so what we've done is, rather than go out with short-term scopes of work, little packages of work that can support an Indigenous business, we've gone out with long-term contracts, multi-year partnerships that allow Indigenous businesses to have the confidence to invest in their business, buy new gear, train their people, and ultimately become more competitive, which is good for them and good for the industry, good for BHP. And the power of that for our traditional owner partners is it provides meaningful employment for their young people, it keeps their people on country, and that's so important to them.
And in terms of your relationships with traditional owners, do those processes take a lot more time now?
Absolutely. I think dialogue is so important with our traditional owner businesses, listening so important, and that's a skill set that we've really invested in from board through to operational levels. It's the dialogue in the community that actually shapes the business decisions we make, and that takes time, but it's time well spent.
But how do you kind of manage that balance between the urgency of decision making and the need for change and what you're doing, with the idea of taking much more time to have negotiations and discuss things?
Well, I don't have a perfect solution for that, Jennifer. It's just one of the real positive forces that exists within our business. It's our chairman often talks about it, the tension point, the positive tension point between social value and financial value creation. That's where the rubber really hits the road. It's that kind of dialogue with the context of BHP's big agenda. That's where, as I said, that's where the rubber hits the road.
So I know you'd obviously kind of have the same general approach no matter where you operate, but are there particular differences about operations in Australia compared to other countries?
Look, every jurisdiction is different in some ways. I think what we're seeing, we're investing a lot more capital in Canada, for example. We've got a major potash development in Saskatchewan, a multi-billion-dollar investment, and we found Canada to be a very supportive place for mining investment. Stable fiscal and industrial relations policy, very much behind the critical minerals stimulus program, and we found that to be a very positive environment for BHP to operate, and we've got an opportunity there which we don't get. It's really a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-multi-generation opportunity to start a new 100-year basin. So we've got the Pilbara here in Western Australia, the Bowen Basin in Queensland, our South Australian copper province, and we've got so many years of experience there to shape how we start our process in Canada, and that's the great opportunity that we have to start a new 100-year basin and start it in the right way with First Nations partnerships, community partnerships, and bringing all of the stakeholders along for the ride.
Okay. Now, obviously, as procurement officer, you had a lot to do with supply chains, broken supply chains, what was going on the last few years. Obviously, things have improved, but how much have they improved?
Yeah, look, I think I was looking a bit more stressed last year. We had a lot of red on our dashboards, but we certainly have seen an easing in global supply chains. Goods are moving around the world far more freely than they were 12 months ago. And if you look at those big forces of the disruption with shipping congestion, freight rates, port congestion, all of that has now largely gone away, and we're seeing, as I say, goods moving around the world fairly freely. Manufacturing capacity is now sort of chewed through that backlog of demand that they were struggling to keep up with through the pandemic, and we're now seeing factories around the world largely being able to keep up with demand. Energy still remains a source of turbulence. Obviously, geopolitical trouble there is providing some upside risk to energy prices. And labour availability is the fourth area, and that's one area where we are seeing some positive signs around net migration here in Australia. Numbers have doubled over the last 12 months, and that's providing some easing, but there is a lag in terms of how that works through the system. So that's probably the fourth area: shipping, manufacturing, energy, labour. Labour's got the longest tail, I would say, in terms of those pressures.
And of course, the other issue is inflation. That's really been a concern recently, which hasn't been for a decade. What impact is that having?
Well, look, we saw across BHP's cost base last year, our costs were up 10% across the board. Look, I think we did a great job with our partners around finding ways to make sure that price increases were linked to productivity gains. And as a result, I think we've done a better job than the industry in terms of keeping a lid on costs. But the pressures were acute, driven by those forces I mentioned. And look, pleasingly, we are seeing upstream conditions ease. If we look at the producer price index, some of the big machinery indices that we track and build into our contracts, we're starting to see flat outcomes in terms of pricing signals after a period of what has been double-digit percentage increases. So this is a job for the procurement team to make sure we convert that easing upstream pricing signals into better unit cost performance at BHP.
Okay. Now, Dino talked about the importance of China as a foundational partner, but there's obviously kind of continuing concerns about the Chinese economy for BHP. How do you see that?
Look, there's been a lot of publicity about the Chinese economy, and the BHP view is that the economy is performing strongly. It's looking at GDP of around 5%, obviously on a much bigger base. Every year the base gets bigger. Housing starts have been weak, but if you look at construction as a percentage of overall steel demand in China, it's around 25% today. 5 years ago it was around 40%. So emerging sectors like manufacturing, autos, green infrastructure, those sectors are performing very strongly in the Chinese economy.
And yes, in terms of its significance for the energy transition, how do you see China play, what role will China play in that?
A huge force in the transition, and that's largely through building out a lot of the critical infrastructure that's required, which to Dino's point is going to require a lot of steel, a lot of copper, a lot of nickel, a lot of those critical minerals that we'll be talking a lot about this week.
Okay, well, we're about to move on to a panel where that'll be one of the topics of discussion. So I'd like to thank you very much, James, for another interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.